Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we take up important articles of the day from the newspaper and discuss them in detail as per the demands of Civil Services exam. Articles covered today are displayed on your screen and their notes in PDF and Word format are provided in the description box down below. Without further ado, let us begin. Now let us start our today's discussion with the first article of the day, and it appeared in the front page of today's Hindu newspaper. Now the 2023 Nobel Prize on Physiology or Medicine, it has been awarded to two scientists for discoveries which concern nucleoside base modification. And this discovery is significant because it enabled the development of effective mRNA vaccines which were used against COVID-19 pandemic. Now this topic, it is important from GS paper 3 perspective as it highlights awareness in the fields of biotechnology. Further, basic principles behind vaccine development and approaches that were adopted by Indian vaccine manufacturers, it appeared in mains of the year 2022. Whereas, in the prelims of the year 2021, a question appeared on recombinant vector vaccines. Hence, this topic, it is important from both prelims as well as mains perspective. Now in the today's discussion of mRNA vaccine, we will first discover how traditional vaccines work, and then we will distinguish this mRNA vaccine with respect to traditional vaccines. Also, we will discuss the benefits that are associated with use of mRNA vaccine. Hence, let us start our today's discussion by understanding what are traditional methods of vaccine development. Now, traditionally, vaccines have been developed using a dead or inactivated viruses. As these viruses, when they are injected into human body, they develop antibodies. And these antibodies, they act against original viruses when they enter our human bodies. Now, there are three different types of vaccines which use a whole virus or bacterium. The first one, it is called as an inactivated vaccine, because this particular vaccine, it uses an inactivated virus of the original or a similar virus, and this virus is inactivated by using chemicals, heat or radiation. And this vaccine, it is particularly used to deal with flu as well as polio, and thereby these vaccines, they can be manufactured at a reasonable scale. For example, there was this vaccine developed in India called Covaxin. As this vaccine, it also used an inactivated COVID-19 virus. However, development of this vaccine, it requires a special laboratory facility, which is then utilized to grow the virus or bacterium in a safe manner. Hence, these type of vaccines, they have a relatively long production time, and hence they require 2 or 3 doses to be administered in order to be effective. Now the second type of vaccine, which uses a whole virus or bacterium, are termed as live attenuated vaccine. As these vaccines, they use a living but weakened version of the virus or one that's very similar. For example, vaccines that are developed for measles, mumps and rubella, also known as MMR vaccine, and chickenpox vaccine, they are of this type. However, these vaccines, they may or may not be suitable for people who have compromised immune system, as these vaccines, they use living but a weakened version of the original virus. Now the third type of vaccine in this regard, it is termed as viral vector vaccine. As this vaccine, it uses a safe virus to deliver a specific protein of the germ of interest, so that this protein, it can trigger an immune response without causing this particular disease. For example, Ebola vaccine, it was made using this viral vector vaccine method. Further, the vaccine that was administered in India on a large scale, that was Covishield, is also a type of this viral vector vaccine. However, as the technology has evolved, instead of using this whole virus, vaccine developers, they are using just a part of that vaccine genetic code. Hence we can see the rise of subunit vaccine. Now this subunit type of vaccine, it only uses a very specific part of a virus or bacterium,
And this specific part of a virus or bacterium, it is termed as a subunit. And this specific part, it is used to generate an immune response in our human bodies. For example, most of the vaccines that we were injected in the childhood, they are subunit vaccines. And these protect people from diseases such as whooping cough, tetanus, diphtheria, or meningitis. However, these two type of vaccine, that are whole bacterium vaccine as well as subunit vaccine, they require a large scale development, which also includes cell culture. As these vaccines, they require growing of cells under a certain condition. And this growing of cell culture, it takes certain time. Thereby, there was a need for a third type of vaccine. And this is called as an mRNA vaccine. As mRNA, it stands for messenger RNA. And this mRNA, it is a form of nucleic acid which carries genetic information. And this mRNA, it teaches cells how to make proteins that trigger an immune response inside our human bodies. Hence, we can say, instead of putting an inactivated virus or a subunit of that virus into our body, this mRNA type of vaccine, it utilizes only a messenger ribonucleic acid, which is then utilized to deliver a message into the immune system. And this message, it helps to activate our immune response to a certain virus. As these genetically engineered mRNA, they are used to make proteins which are needed to fight a particular virus. And since these RNA, they are already present in our cells, thereby this method, it does away with the need for cell culture, which was very prominent in these first two types of vaccines. Now, like any other vaccine, this mRNA vaccine, it also attempts to activate our immune system. And this is done by producing antibodies which helps us counter an infection in form of live virus. Whereas most of the previous vaccine that we have discussed, they used either weakened or a dead bacteria or virus to evoke a immune system response. However, with these mRNA vaccine, they only introduce a piece of genetic material that corresponds to this viral protein. And this viral protein called as spike virus. Hence, these mRNA vaccines, they use genetic material from the disease causing virus. And this genetic material, it helps us to generate immune response in our human body, which is done by producing antibodies that helps us deal with when we are exposed to viruses. However, as these vaccines, they do not use weakened or dead bacteria or viruses, hence the exposure to viruses is not applicable in this type of vaccine. While mRNA vaccine, they are more of a direct approach in getting the cells to produce a necessary protein to deal with external viruses. However, these mRNAs, they are also very fragile in nature, and hence they will be shred apart either at room temperature or when there is a body enzyme acts on it when this particular mRNA is injected into human body. Hence, to preserve the integrity of these mRNAs, they need to be wrapped in an oily lipids or a fat cells. However, these type of vaccine, they are faced with certain challenges because mRNA vaccine, they needs to be frozen at a very low temperatures. Hence, this creates challenges into the vaccine supply chain. However, these type of vaccines, they also have several benefits. First of all, these vaccines, they are both safe and non-infectious in nature because these RNA vaccines, they are not made up of pathogen particles or inactivated pathogens. Hence, they are non-infectious in nature. Further, these RNAs, they do not integrate itself into the host genome and thereby they do not interact with our DNA. Hence, these RNA strand in the vaccine, they are degraded once the protein is made, thereby making this vaccine particularly safe for humans. Further, these RNA vaccines, they have also delivered high efficacy. As clinical trials, they have found mRNA vaccine to generate a stronger type of immunity when compared with traditional vaccines. Further, These RNA vaccines, they are well tolerated by healthy individuals with very few side effects. Further, producing these type of vaccines, it is also easier as these vaccines they only use a genetic code which makes them very easy to update, thereby helps these type of vaccines deal with emerging variants. Further, these vaccines they can be produced more rapidly in a lab conditions, thereby it also improves the responsiveness of these vaccines to emerging outbreaks. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on mRNA vaccines. Now, moving on to the next article of the day, which appeared on page 4 of today's Hindu newspaper. Now, the GST collection it rose to rupees 1.63 lakh crores in the month of September 2023. Now, this collection it shows a 10.2% increase from the corresponding period of last year, that was September 2022. As this article highlights that the GST collection of state of Kerala it registered a 12% growth in the month of September. Hence, this news it highlights the significance of GST taxation regime in increasing the revenues of the indirect tax collection. Hence, the topic of our today's discussion is GST tax mechanism. Now, why are we discussing this particular topic? It is because GS Paper 3 syllabus it highlights government budgeting, and GST it is an important component of taxation revenues for both central as well as state governments. Further, in the mains of the year 2017, a question appeared on 101st Amendment Act which brought GST into fruition. Further, in the prelims of the same year, that is 2017, a question appeared on advantages of implementing goods and services tax. Hence, in the scope of our today's discussion, we will first learn about what is the impact of GST mechanism. However, we will also discuss the challenges that the governments have faced in order to implement this goods and services tax regime. Further, we will also discuss steps that were undertaken in order to improve the GST mechanism, which will be followed by a suggestive way forward. As this way forward, it will suggest us steps that the government further needs to undertake in order to improve the implementation of goods and services tax regime. Hence, let us start our today's discussion by discussing what is the positive impact of GST on indirect tax regime in our country. Now, before discussing this impact, let us take a brief overview of what is a goods and services tax. Now, this goods and services tax, it is a unified tax system which replaced multiple indirect tax that were levied before by both central as well as state governments. And this GST regime, it was implemented on 1st of July of the year 2017. Now, this GST, it follows a dual structure and it comprises of central GST as well as state GSTs. And these are levied concurrently by central government as well as state governments. Now, this dual structure is further supplemented by what is called an integrated GST. As this integrated GST, it is levied on interstate supplies and imports. And this integrated GST, it is collected by the central government. It is further distributed to various destination states. Now, this GST regime, it is heralded by a GST council. And this GST council, it acts as a joint forum under Article 279, subsection A of the Indian Constitution. As this council, it consists of Union Finance Minister who acts as a chairperson, and it also consists of representatives from both state as well as union territory governments. Now, this GST tax council, it makes various decisions on different aspects of GST. For example, this GST council, it decides on tax rates, exemptions, revenue sharing mechanism which exists between both central as well as state governments. Now, what are the impacts of such GST tax regime? The first impact is that this GST tax regime, it pushes for a cooperative federalism in India. As GST council meetings, they have become examples of cooperative federalism mechanism. And this is where both central and state governments, they deliberate, discuss and take timely decisions on various aspects of GST mechanism. Further, this GST tax regime, it also brings several benefits to taxpayers in the country. As total tax liability, they have come down for common use items because of lower tax incidences under this GST regime. Additionally, taxpayers also have several benefits which include easier online process, a smooth flow of input tax credit as well as faster refunds. Further, this GST regime, it also brings benefits to several micro, small as well as medium enterprises in our country. As this GST tax regime, it eases the compliance burden on these MSMEs through various measures like composition scheme, quarterly return with monthly payments, as well as an optional annual return, etc. Further, this GST tax regime, it has also resulted into enhanced revenue collection for both central as well as state governments. As this GST regime, it has shown an impressive and steady increase in revenue collection over the past 6 years. And this is because of higher economic activity and enhanced compliance. For example, the revenues for September 2023, as we have already highlighted, it showed a 10.2% increase from the corresponding period of last year, that was September 2022. Also, this GST tax regime has resulted into increased tax buoyancy. As this GST tax regime, it has shown an improvement in revenues of state. As the tax buoyancy, it has improved to 1.22 after the implementation of GST, which was previously just 0.72 before the rollout of GST mechanism. Further, this GST tax regime, it also helps in improving the market integration and further improves the ease of doing business in the Indian economy. And this is because GST regime, it enhances internal trade flows, brings tax neutral places for businesses and has a standard taxation structure, etc. Now, after we have discussed what are the positive impacts of GST tax regime, let us now discuss what are the challenges that the government has faced in implementing this GST tax regime. Now, the first challenge that the government faces in implementing this GST tax regime is related to technological glitches. As GST, it is implemented by both GST portal as well as an e-way bill mechanism. However, these two portals, they have faced multiple technical glitches and hence they are yet to mature at the desired level. And this further increases the challenges which are related to implementing of GST tax regime in a smooth manner. Further, this GST tax regime, it consists of complex tax slabs. And this complex slab structure with continuously switching between tax rates have created an undesired confusion. And this has resulted into a complex compliance system for Indian businesses. Additionally, fluctuating tax rates have also led to unethical profiteering practices by various businesses. And hence, we can say that this complex slab structure, it also erodes the taxpayers' trust. As country, it currently faces petitions to various courts which are filled by taxpayers against arbitrarily implementing these tax slabs. And thereby, it has resulted into cancellation of GST registrations and disproportionate denials in input tax credits. Further, GST mechanism, it has also witnessed severe tax evasion and fraudulent claims by various taxpayers. As GST officers, they have busted a total of 304 syndicates which involve more than 9,000 fake GST IDs. And hence, input tax claims of more than 25,000 crores are found to be bogus. Further, there are also challenges which are related to expanding the GST purview in the country, as many commodities currently, such as fuel and alcohol, they are not under the GST purview. And this is mainly because the central and state governments, they have been at loggerheads over revenue collection. And hence, these central and state governments, they are increasingly dependent on excise duty on both petroleum products as well as alcohol to shore up their revenues. And because of this, the GST Council, it has been reluctant to discuss this matter, as around total of 30% of states revenue, it comes from excise duties which are levied on petrol and diesel. Hence, bringing this petrol and diesel as well as alcohol under the GST purview is currently faced with many challenges. Now, after we have discussed what are the challenges that the government is facing in implementing this GST tax regime, let us now take a look to understand what are the steps that the government has taken in order to improve the GST tax mechanism. Now, there are many steps that the government has taken in order to improve the compliance of GST mechanism. The first step is that the government has increased the information sharing between various departments. And in this regard, the government has amended the provisions of Prevention of Money Laundering Act of the year 2002. As this amendment, it allows Enforcement Directorate to share information with GST network. And hence, the ED, it will have powers to disclose information which are related to any prosecution under the Indian Penal Code and other laws. Further, the government is also focused on increasing the technology penetration, as this is done through use of digital tools by field officers for input tax credit verification as well as e-way bill verification. And hence, it generates actionable data which will be further used to increase GST compliance. Also important in this regard is the use of advanced analytics in indirect tax regime, which is also known as Advait. As this tool, it was rolled out in the year of 2021. And this, it acts as a flagship analytics project for indirect taxes department. And this tool, it aims to use big data as well as artificial intelligence to enhance indirect tax revenue, increase the taxpayers base and support a data-driven tax policy. Further, the government has also tightened the GST registration norms. As GST authorities, they plan to introduce biometric authentication and geotagging for existing and new registrants. And if these new registrants, they match as risky entities who avail input tax credits, thereby their registration norms will then be cancelled. Further, the government has also tightened the return filing system. As this return filing system, it aims to act against fraudsters who misuse PAN account numbers as well as Aadhaar identification to obtain GST registration. Now, after we have taken a look at various steps that were taken in order to improve the GST tax compliance, let us now further take a look at what are the steps that may be further required in order to improve this GST tax mechanism. The first suggestion in this regard, it pertains to rationalization of tax rates currently. As we have already discussed that there are multiple tax slabs in the GST tax regime, and this, it reduces the amount of compliance and also discourages the business. Hence, by rationalizing these tax rates, we can further ease the compliance and provide free flow of refunds and credits to registered businesses. Further, the GST tax regime, it also requires legal as well as administrative changes. And this can be done by tightening enforcement to curb leakages and simplifying the tax filing experiences. Further, there is also a need to increase the use of technology, which can be done by implementing a technology-based monitoring system which will be used to monitor e-returns e-invoices, e-way bills, as well as Aadhaar authentication. Also, there is a need to streamline audits, assessments, as well as investigation, which can be done by issuance of a standard operating procedure. As this standard operating procedure, it will have a process for summons, investigation, as well as audits. Lastly, but also most importantly, there's also a need to expand the tax network of GST mechanism. And this can be done by bringing alcohol as well as petroleum products under the purview of GST tax regime. Hence, by rationalizing the tax rates, bringing legal and administrative changes, enhancing the use of technology, streamlining the audits, assessment, and investigation process, and expanding the GST tax network will further help improve the collection of GST tax in the country. And this will herald a new age for indirect tax regime in the Indian economy. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on goods and services tax. Now let us move to the next article of the day, which appeared on page 10 of today's Hindu newspaper. And this article reports that citing the findings of Bihar caste survey, leaders of the India Alliance, they have reiterated their demand for a country-wide caste census because they believe this caste census it will help ensure social justice for the deprived classes in Indian society. Now, why are we studying this particular topic? This is because caste is a salient feature of Indian society and this particular syllabus it is highlighted in GS paper 1. Further, GS paper 2 syllabus it mentions mechanisms, laws, institutions and bodies constituted for protection of betterment of vulnerable section. And these backward classes they constitute a vulnerable section in Indian society. Also, in the mains of the year 2020, a question appeared on caste and has it lost its relevance in understanding of multicultural Indian society. Further, reservations which are made under Article 1614, it found itself in the prelims of the year 2023. Hence, this topic of caste census, it is important from both prelims as well as mains perspective. Hence, in our today's discussion on caste census, we will first discuss what is a caste census. Then, we will discuss why such caste census was topped in first place. Then, we will also discuss why is there a need for a caste census in Indian society currently. And towards the end, we will also discuss a suggestive way forward which will help us understand the measures that are needed for betterment of vulnerable sections in Indian society. Hence, let us start our today's discussion by discussing what is a caste census. Now, what is a caste-based survey? Caste census or survey, it is a caste-wise tabulation of population which can be conducted in a census exercise. Now, enumeration of caste was last included in the Census of India dating back to the year of 1931. This practice, it was stopped by the British in the 1941 census, and post-independence, the government of India, it did not revive such practices. However, subsequent census in post-independent India, it publishes a separate data on scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. However, such census data does not include other castes. Now let us discuss why such enumeration of caste-based census was stopped in the first place. It was stopped because estimates on caste data are already available with the government of India. As reasonable estimates of broad social breakup of Indian population, it is already available through various government surveys. Now such data is available with the government through conduction of National Sample Survey Office data or National Family Health Survey data. Hence, the need for caste-based estimates were not felt. Further, there are operational difficulties in conduction of such surveys as well. As a full caste-based census, it will include a jati-wise breakup which would pose extreme difficulties. As currently, we do not have any official list of all castes in the country. And this would mean that an extensive post-census classification work will cause further delay in publication of census exercise. And this will create difficulties for all other activities that are associated with census exercise. Further, conduction of caste-based survey can promote identity politics, which may further lead to marginalization of developmental issues such as health or education. Further, conduction of such surveys may lead to rise in demand for higher quotas, and it will further pose a threat to the judicial imposed cap of 50% on reservations. Hence, such surveys were stopped in the first place. Now, due to demands of various sections of the society, some state governments have decided to conduct caste-based survey. For example, Bihar. Now, why is there a need for such caste-based survey? Let us discuss this in the next slide. Now, arguments which support the need for caste-based surveys include that the current data on castes, which are collected by NSSO and National Family Health Survey data, are based on survey-based estimates, which is unlike the census data. Because the census is actually the enumeration of every person in the country, and it is not based on estimates. Further, census also generates data on educational level, occupation, household assets, and life expectancy of each group, and it enumerates at each level that is recognized by the Government of India. Further, there are common practices that some census data are released with a gap of 5 to 7 years after the census is completed. Hence, an enumeration of caste-based survey can be published even after the census data is generally published. Further, caste-based census is also important because it is necessary to understand people's socio-economic status, which are determined by caste and their subcaste. And such data, it will help in designing policies for affirmative action and redistributive justice. Further, the Supreme Court in Indira Sahni judgment, it highlighted that caste-based evidence it needs to be collected every 10 years or so in order to screen out the privileged caste from the benefits of reservation. And a caste-based survey is a need of the hour for evidence-based policy making. Further, over the last decade, we have witnessed some of the largest mobilizations which are based on caste, and it was done by the dominant sections of society such as Jats, Patels, and Marathas, and they demanded reservations. However, these demands were not based on scientific evidences on the size or their relative level of deprivation. Hence, a caste-based survey will provide us with the data which will eventually help the government to evaluate such demands based on scientific data. And it will help the vulnerable section to legitimize their demands for reservation policies. Now that we have understood the need for caste-based survey, let us understand a way forward which will further help to utilize existing data to improve the condition of backward classes in the country. The first way forward is to understand the utility of already existing data, and it will eventually help in conduct of academic exercise which will help map social inequalities and social changes in the Indian society. Further, there is a need to read all existing data in a holistic manner, as linking and syncing of aggregated census data with other large datasets such as NSSO and National Family Health Survey data, it will help cover issues that the census exercise eventually do not. For example, maternal health of marginalized section women. Further, there is a need to undertake changes in the census exercise, as it will help employ methods that are precise, faster, and cost effective, and it will eventually lead to better coordination between different data sources. Additionally, there is a need for stock taking of previous exercises, as it will help us learn the changes that are necessary in conduction of census exercises. Further, there is a need to address concerns that are associated with census exercise, as there is a need to address the issue that are related to methodology, relevance of census exercise, dissemination of census data, transparency mechanism, and ensuring the privacy of such data. It needs to be taken seriously in order to make the exercise of census more effective. Hence, by utilizing the existing data on castes, reading all the different data sets holistically, inculcating changes in census exercise, stock taking the previous exercise, and addressing the concerns that are related to methodology, transparency, and privacy will enable the caste based census to facilitate an effective policy work, and it will further help academy in order to map social inequalities and social changes with respect to Indian society. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on caste based survey. Now, moving on to the next article of the day, which appeared in page 10 of today's Hindu newspaper. Now, this article, it highlights that RTI queries, it has helped reveal several irregularities in the Manrega execution in the state of West Bengal. And this article, it highlights the role of Right to Information Act in highlighting irregularities in government scheme. And hence, it helps improve governance, transparency and accountability of Indian governmental system. Thereby, this topic is important from GS Paper 2 perspective. Further, in the mains of the year 2020, a question appeared on recent amendments to Right to Information Act. Whereas, in the year of 2018, in prelims, a question appeared on Right to Education Act. And hence, it highlights right-based access to various governmental services. Hence, in the scope of our today's discussion on RTI Act, we will first understand what is an RTI Act. Then, we will also discuss exemptions that are provided in this Act which prevents disclosure of certain kinds of information. Moving forward, we will also discuss hurdles that are faced in implementing this RTI Act in a comprehensive manner, which will be followed by certain suggestive steps which can be undertaken in order to improve the implementation of RTI Act. Hence, let us start our today's discussion by discussing what is an RTI Act. Now, the RTI Act of 2005 makes the governance citizen-centric, which is done by equipping them with the power to seek information from public authorities. It also provides with a mechanism for grievance redressal, so that the citizens who are denied information can seek redressal under the provisions of these Act. Further, an RTI applicant is not required to give any reasons for seeking information. Also, Section 4 of the RTI Act mandates public authorities for proactive disclosure of certain information, like functions, structures, powers, and duty of its officers and employee financial information. Also, the Act makes certain authorities responsible for supplying information. Now, public authorities designate some officers in their administrative units as Public Information Officers or PIOs, and these PIOs are mandated to supply information within 30 days of seeking information, or 48 hours if the information sought concerns the life or liberty of a person. Also, there is a two-tiered appeal mechanism under the Act. If the information sought is not provided within the specified time, then the RTI applicant can file appeal against the decision of PIOs. The authority for first appeal lies with the public authority itself. The first appellate authority happens to be an officer senior in rank to the Central Public Information Officer, whereas the final appellate authority or the second authority is the Center or State Information Commission, which is a statutory body that has a Chief Information Commissioner and is assisted by not more than 10 information commissioners. And these commissioners are appointed by President in case of Center and Governor in case of State respectively. Now, this Act also provides for certain exemptions from disclosure of information. What are these exemptions? Let us take a look in the next slide. The first set of exemptions are provided under the Section 8(1) of RTI Act, which provides exemption for information under following conditions. In case such information prejudicially affect the sovereignty or integrity of India, or such information which is expressly forbidden by any court of law. Also, an information is denied in case it causes a breach of privileges of legislature, or it is a commercial confidence, trade secret, or an intellectual property. Further, an information is denied in case it is available to a person in its fiduciary relationship. Also, information is denied in case such information is received in confidence from foreign governments, or such information will endanger safety of a person, or if it will impede investigation process. Further, Section 9 of RTI Act prohibits disclosure of information whose copyright is not with the state itself, whereas Section 24 of the Act exempts information which is related to security or intelligence organizations. However, despite such provisions, the implementation of RTI Act faces certain hurdles. What are these hurdles? Let us take a look in the next slide. The first hurdle that the RTI Information Act faces is that there is a low public awareness. According to a PricewaterhouseCoopers study, only 15% of respondents were aware of the RTI Act, and the awareness level is low among the disadvantaged communities such as women, rural population, or marginalized section of society. Further, there are constraints in filing the application, which includes non-availability of user guides for information seekers, non-standardized application forms, non-friendly attitude of public information officers, or inadequate efforts to receive applications through e-governance means. Further, the information provided through RTI Act is of poor quality, which either is incomplete or lacks substantial data. Also, in many cases, there are failure to provide information within the statutory requirement of 30 days. Public officials face certain challenges, which is due to inadequate record management procedures, which is further aggravated by lack of enabling infrastructure. Also, the public information officers are inadequately trained, which is a big challenge primarily due to huge number of PIOs to be trained, frequent transfers, and of huge constraint with respect to availability of training resources. However, there are several steps that must be taken in order to overcome these hurdles. What are such steps? Let us take a look in the next slide. The first step that can be taken in order to improve the implementation of RTI Act is by making the application process more user friendly, as appropriate governments and public authorities need to design the RTI process keeping in view the needs and convenience of its citizens. Also, the use of digital technology should be promoted. Hence, the records that are required to be catalogued and indexed in manner that the entire data should be available through a centralized system which uses advanced technologies such as big data for data processing. Also, there is an immediate need for investment in infrastructure, as the ARC report had mentioned that the government may allocate 1% of the funds of flagship program for a period of 5 years in order to improve the infrastructure requirements for RTI Act. Also, there is an urgent need for an external agency in order to train the PIOs, and potential of non-profit organizations to carry out training in official or non-official capacities can be trapped by appropriate government and training institutes. Also, in order to reduce the burden on public information officers, there is an inherent need for promoting proactive disclosures under the Section 4 of RTI Act. Hence, by making the process more user friendly, using digital technology, investing in infrastructure, hiring an external agency for training, and making proactive disclosures, we can improve the implementation of RTI Act. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on Right to Information Act. Now moving on to the next article of the day, which appeared in page 10 of today's Hindu newspaper. Now according to this article, Indian Air Force, it has placed 2 contracts with Bharat Dynamics Limited, and this is for procurement of indigenous Astra Missile, which is an air-to-air missile. And the Indian Air Force, it plans to arm its frontline fighters with these Astra Mk-1 missiles. And also, these Astra Mk-2 missiles, it will become mainstay of IAFs of Indian Air Force's missile arsenal, thereby reducing our import dependency. Now, what is this Astra missile? And it is important from GS paper 3 perspective because the syllabus, it deals with indigenization of technology. Also, in the mains of the year 2014, a question appeared on foreign direct investment in the defense sector, whereas in the prelims of the same year, a question appeared on Agni 4 missile. Hence, let us discuss what is this Astra missile. Now, Astra missile, it is a beyond visual range missile, which acts as an air-to-air missile that helps Air Force deal with aerial threats. Now, this type of missile, it was indigenously developed by Defense Research and Development Organization, also known as DRDO. Now, let us discuss the range of these missiles. The first version, which is known as Mk1 version, it has a range of 80 to 110 kilometers, whereas the Mk2 version, which is currently under development, will have around 160 kilometer range. And hence, these type of missile, it will play a crucial role in beyond visual range combat by Indian Air Forces. Further, these missiles, they can operate up to an altitude of 20 kilometers, whereas the max speed of these missiles are about 4.5 Machs. Thereby, this missile, it is a crucial component of our indigenous defense production. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on Astra Missile, and it also concludes our today's edition of Daily News Simplified.